The following video is intended for mature audiences. It contains horror elements, adult themes, and language that might not be suitable for younger viewers. Welcome to the Southern Underworld, your place for original horror, sci-fi, and thriller content where the stories are always written with heart. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. We'd love to know in what part of the world you are watching and what is your favorite horror movie of all time. Thank you for watching and enjoy the video. Flight 2317 traced a line through the sky, cruising at the impressive height of 35,000 feet. The passengers were lulled into a false sense of security by the steady hum of the engines and the gentle turbulence that mimicked a cradle's rocking. Serena Jenkins, an experienced flight attendant with countless flights to her name, moved down the narrow aisle with practiced ease, serving drinks as if it were second nature. A piercing scream from the front galley broke the calm inside the cabin. Serena's heart pounded in her chest as she raced toward the source of the noise. Her colleague Brian stood rooted to the spot, his shaking hand pointing at an open cockpit door that revealed a disturbing sight, an empty flight deck. "They're gone," he managed to say. "Both pilots, they're just gone." Serena pushed down the fear, her professional training kicking in. "Check the bathrooms," she instructed him. "I'll search through the cabin." Brian nodded and hurried off on his task. Serena addressed the bewildered passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, "please remain seated and stay calm. We're dealing with a small issue, but there's no cause for alarm." She methodically checked each row with growing apprehension, hoping to find the missing pilots tucked away somewhere unexpected. But they were nowhere in sight. Brian returned, his usually tanned complexion ghostly and pale under the harsh overhead lights. "There's no sign of them," he said breathlessly. "Serena, what do we do?" Before she could answer him, another scream echoed from below, coming from the cargo hold. Serena and Brian exchanged frightened stares of pure fear. "Stay here," she whispered. "Keep everyone calm. I'm going to see what that sound was." Serena picked up a flashlight from the emergency kit and headed into the belly of the plane. A faint metallic scent tickled her nose. The cargo hold was a maze of luggage and shipping crates, their shadows shifting ominously under her flashlight's beam. Turning a corner, she held back a gasp at what she encountered. The pilot and co-pilot lay scattered on the metal floor, their bloodied bodies contorted into the most grotesque of positions. Their faces were locked in terror, eyes wide with fear, their mouths open and frozen mid-scream. She stumbled backward, her stomach roiling. As she turned to flee, she noticed a glint of metal, a crucifix clutched tightly in the pilot's dead hand. Serena raced back to cabin level, slamming the cargo hold door behind her. She grabbed Brian's arm, pulling him close enough that she felt his shaky breaths against her cheek. "They're dead," she whispered into his ear. "Both of them are dead." Brian's face drained of color until he resembled a specter himself. "But who's flying this plane then?" he asked. As if answering his question, the plane suddenly veered sharply to one side, causing the passengers to scream. Luggage tumbled from the overhead compartments. Serena fought against gravity to reach the cockpit again, gripping anything solid for support. When she opened the cockpit door, the scene before her defied reason. Controls moved on their own as if manipulated by unseen hands. Words materialized on the windshield, written by an invisible finger. "Souls for safe passage." A rolling shiver coursed Serena's spine as she slammed the door shut, reeling from disbelief. A tap on her shoulder made her jump. An elderly woman stood there, her dark eyes shining with an eerie light. "It's hungry," she rasped in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "We must feed it." Before Serena could react, the old woman lunged at the closest passenger, a young man engrossed in his laptop, unaware of the imminent danger. She lifted him above her head and charged toward the cockpit with strength that contradicted her age and frailty. "No!" Serena screamed, but it was too late. Everything was spiraling out of control. The hatchway exploded open. and the young man's body was suspended mid-air before he was sucked into the void of space. The cabin depressurized with a loud snap. Oxygen masks dropped as the passengers screamed in panic, their cries reverberating like trapped animals. Just then, Brian appeared, his face stained with blood from a forehead wound. "What's going on?" Serena gripped his shoulders, her fingers digging into his shirt. "Something's taken control of the plane," she shouted back. "It wants sacrifices." As if to validate her statement, the aircraft righted itself, the emergency exit ceiling shut by an invisible hand. Panic ensued within the cabin. Passengers turned against one another, some shielding their loved ones while others searched for another victim to pacify the phantom pilot. Serena's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and plans. There had to be an escape from this madness, a way to save everyone. Her recollection returned to the crucifix she'd spotted earlier in the cargo hold. Hopeful, she dashed back to the cargo hold, sidestepping flailing limbs and pleas for help along the way. She lifted the crucifix from its resting place in the captain's lifeless grip, murmuring an apology. A jolt ran through her arm as she clasped the cold metal. Forbidden knowledge surged in her mind, ancient rituals, horrifying chants. Serena was terrified but knew what had to be done. When she re-entered the chaotic cabin, 3 more seats were vacant, their absence noticeable. Serena battled her way to the cockpit, clutching tightly onto the crucifix. The door ominously swung open at her presence. The controls moved autonomously, but now Serena could discern a faint figure in the pilot's seat. "Enough," Serena declared, her voice bold as she brandished the crucifix. The shadow recoiled with a hiss akin to steam releasing from a pressure cooker. Words materialized on the windshield. "Fool, you cannot stop me." Serena started to chant, the words foreign and unfamiliar. The crucifix warmed in her hand, radiating an otherworldly light. The shadow convulsed, its wings appearing momentarily and its claws slashing at the air. The plane trembled beneath them, alarms sounding as they lost altitude. Serena chanted louder. A bright light shone from the crucifix, illuminating the cockpit. The shadow let out one last deafening shriek as it vanished into thin air, the sound reverberating off the walls of the plane. The controls suddenly went dead, and for a terrifying moment, they were hurtling downward with no way to stop. Serena lunged for the yoke, and years of simulator training took over. She wrestled with the dead controls, pulling up on them with all her might. The ground continued to rush toward them, the city lights expanding until they were blinding dots of white and yellow. Serena gritted her teeth against gravity's pull until it was painful, her muscles straining against the tremendous force. At the last possible moment, she managed to pull up just above the rooftop of the hangar, grazing a few treetops before crashing onto the runway. The passengers squealed, and the jarring impact forced nausea into Serena's throat. "Steady now," she whispered. "Almost home." The aircraft careened to a halt, the screech of metal scraping against concrete slicing through the cabin. Serena's fingers turned ghostly white as they clung desperately to the seat, her body sagging under the weight of bone-deep fatigue, her mind teetering on the precipice of oblivion. Yet in this state of overwhelming exhaustion, a small flame of gratitude flickered. She had made it out alive. She twisted in her seat, intending to share this momentary triumph with Brian. But instead of meeting familiar eyes awash with relief, she was confronted by an uncanny emptiness. The once lively cabin now resonated with an unnerving silence, row after row of vacant seats stretching out like tombstones behind her. An icy dread slithered into Serena's heart as she grasped a horrifying truth. There had never been any passengers. The entity hadn't desired the souls of unsuspecting innocents for safe passage, it hungered for hers alone. Emergency vehicles swarmed around the marooned plane like bees to honey. Their harsh lights punctuated the reality that Serena could neither comprehend nor accept. In her grip, she felt the crucifix pulsating with a malevolent energy that seemed almost sentient. A smile slowly stretched across Serena's lips, even as terror gnawed at her gut. Her eyes glittered unnaturally bright in the dim light, reflecting not just luminescence, but something far more sinister lurking within. The entity may have been expelled from their realm, but its essence remained within her. As rescue workers approached the plane, their voices cutting through the symphony of wind and rain outside, Serena straightened up and smoothed her uniform with shaky hands. She plastered a comforting smile on her face. ready to welcome them aboard and explain how she was the sole survivor of such a tragedy. After all, she would have an entirely new flight crew and passengers to greet, and their souls were so tantalizingly ripe for the taking. She was now more than a mere flight attendant. She was the entity's emissary, its instrument of harvest in this world. With each step down the creaky stairs of the abandoned factory, my fear grew. The musty smell of old earth filled my nostrils as I descended into the dark cellar. My lantern barely lit the way as I ducked under beams and dodged turns. The air felt suffocating, like a weight pressing down on me. As I went deeper, I sensed something sinister watching me. Panic set in as I reached a dead end and heard scratching behind a crate. A gnarled hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with a vice-like grip. It was an old woman with wild eyes. Her tattered clothes hung on an emaciated frame, her face contorted with anger. She blocked my path, gripping my arm tightly and hissing for me to leave. But it wasn't just her. The darkness around me came alive, whispering with an otherworldly force. I struggled to break free, but her grip was surprisingly strong. As I fell backward, shadows slithered out of the corners of my eyes, their movements unnatural. The creatures closed in, their whispers growing louder. I ran towards the exit, my heart hammering. Moonlight filtered through the trees as I burst into an open clearing. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind me. I fumbled for my keys and dove into my car, locking the door behind me. As I drove away, the image of the strange creatures and the old woman lingered in my mind, haunting every waking moment. After days of research, I discovered that the alcove was a sacred site for an indigenous tribe until settlers desecrated it, angering spirits. With supplies and a knot in my stomach, I returned to the abandoned factory. As I explored the dark corridors, my senses heightened. Suddenly, a whisper brushed against my ear, and I spun around. There was nothing behind me. I continued forward, feeling a presence looming over me. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the silence. Brave and stupid, I ran towards it and found ghostly figures surrounded by a faint blue light. Before I could make sense of it all, they vanished. In the dim light, a figure emerged from the shadows, with inhuman features and glowing red eyes. Paralyzed with fear, I attempted to run, but I couldn't move. When my legs regained their footing, I stumbled and fell, striking my head on a pile of debris. Disoriented, I stood, running away from the wailing sounding behind me. The creature chased me through the factory. I came to an impasse at the end of a corridor. Cornered, I grabbed a metal pipe, prepared to fight for my life. I swung at its head, the metal making full contact with its skull, disorienting the creature long enough for me to find an exit and escape to the outside. The creature gave chase, still determined to attack me, and despite my best efforts, I knew I wouldn't defeat it. Suddenly, a helicopter appeared overhead with a searchlight and megaphone ordering us to surrender. I sprinted towards the light, ignoring the pain in my head. A soldier pulled me inside just as the creature was about to tear into my flesh with its jagged claws. In time, the adrenaline wore off. We landed at a medical facility where I was lucky to be alive, despite the severity of my wounds. The soldier who had saved me stayed by my side as I recovered, offering words of encouragement. As I healed, I couldn't help but think about how close I was to not making it out alive. I felt relief wash over me, but then the memories flooded back. The creature, the chase, the attack. What was that thing? I asked one morning, a week removed from my ordeal. It's an experimental project that escaped from a nearby lab, the soldier explained. We're still gathering information. Is it dead? I shuddered at the thought of it coming after me again. Yes, we made sure of it, the soldier assured. But then he asked for my help in understanding the creature. Despite my fear, I knew I had to do my part. I didn't want anyone else to suffer the same fate. So I agreed to tell him everything I could remember about that night. As I recounted my encounter with the creature, the memories flooded back. Its effortless movements and razor-sharp claws were etched in my mind. The soldier and a doctor listened, taking notes and nodding. The doctor suggested consulting experts, but that they should be careful to not cause panic or arouse any suspicions. I continued to recover, restricted to the bare and desolate setting of a former covert military facility that had been repurposed for renegades. The walls were made of cold, hard concrete, and the floor was lined with industrial-strength linoleum tiles. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a narrow cot for me to rest on and a small metal table by my bedside. Above me, fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly, casting an eerie glow over my surroundings. It was clear that this was a base designed for secrecy and functionality, not comfort or luxury. Despite this, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive and under the watchful care of those in charge. Weeks passed by in a blur as I went through rigorous psychological assessments and rehabilitation sessions. Sergeant Daniels, the soldier who had rescued me, became an ever-present figure, checking on my recovery every day. He would often bring books and puzzles to keep my mind busy, attempting to distract me from the nightmares that haunted my dreams. During one of our conversations, Sergeant Daniels mentioned that the creature I encountered was not an isolated incident. There had been reports of similar encounters in different parts of the country. People were disappearing under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only confusion and fear. It was clear that the government had been keeping this information hidden from the public. But why? What were they trying to protect? The questions swirled in my mind, demanding answers that seemed just out of reach. I grew restless, confined to the sterile walls of the medical facility. I yearned for some semblance of normalcy, for a chance to return to my life before all this happened. But deep down, I knew that my life would never be the same. The encounter with the creature had changed everything, and I couldn't simply go back to the way things were. One evening, as Sergeant Daniels sat beside me during our usual conversation, I mustered up the courage to ask him about the secrets that the government was hiding. His face tightened, a flicker of hesitation crossing his eyes. He sighed heavily before finally responding. "The truth is, there's more to this than what meets the eye," he started cautiously. "The government has been experimenting with genetic mutations and bioengineering for years. They were trying to create super soldiers, beings with enhanced physical capabilities and heightened senses." I stared at him in disbelief, my mind racing to catch up with his words. Super soldiers? Genetic mutations? It felt like I had stumbled into some sort of sci-fi nightmare. "But something went wrong," Sergeant Daniels continued. "The creatures that you encountered were once human soldiers who volunteered for the experiments, but they lost control of their humanity and became monstrous beings. The government lost control of them, and now they roam free, wreaking havoc wherever they go." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was beyond anything I could have imagined. The government had turned men into monsters, and now innocent people were paying the price. "But why keep it a secret?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and fear. Sergeant Daniels looked away, his expression heavy with guilt. "The government doesn't want the public to know about their failed experiments. They fear the panic it would cause, the loss of trust in their ability to protect the country." I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over. How could they prioritize their reputation over innocent lives? "I need to do something," I said, determination heavy in my tone. "I can't just sit here knowing what's happening out there." Sergeant Daniels nodded in understanding, his eyes flickering with a mix of admiration and concern. "I understand your frustration, but you need to be careful. These creatures are dangerous, and the government will stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the path I had decided to take. I can't just let them continue terrorizing innocent people. I have to do something to stop this. Sergeant Daniels reached out and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "I admire your bravery, but you can't do this alone. We need a plan, resources, and allies who are willing to stand up against the government's corrupt actions." His words resonated with me. I knew I couldn't face this fight alone. I needed help, someone who understood what was at stake. "Are there others like me?" I asked. Sergeant Daniels nodded. "There are resistance groups scattered around the country, people who have been affected by the government's experiments and are fighting back. They want to expose the truth to the world." Relief washed over me, knowing that I wasn't alone in this fight. But I also understood the risks involved. The government had vast resources and would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. We would have to be careful and strategic in our approach. "I want to join them." Sergeant Daniels smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. I knew you would say that. I've already been in contact with some of these resistance groups. They'll be expecting us. A fire ignited in my veins, fueling me with an unbreakable determination as I readied myself for the upcoming battle. No longer a helpless victim, I had transformed into a ferocious warrior, fighting not only for my survival, but for the countless others who had been subjected to the government's cruel experiments. Their screams echoed in my mind, pushing me forward with an unrelenting fury. This was no longer just a fight for justice. It was a war against evil itself. The crunch of leaves underfoot was the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest. We should have turned back hours ago when the narrow trail started fading away, but my friend insisted we keep going until we found the perfect campsite. Now, as darkness smothered the dense trees around us, I realized how foolish we'd been. I messed up, I confessed under my breath, fumbling in my bag for the flashlight. The feeble glow of its light wavered, barely penetrating the crushing blackness. Something's wrong. Jake's chuckle bounced off the surrounding trees, his boots crunching on the leaf-covered trail as he strolled past me. "Scaredy cat," he mocked, his voice a comforting break from the silence. "This is our way." I let out an exhausted sigh and trailed after him with reluctance. Noel and Chris seemed to share my unease. The crack of a twig made us freeze in our tracks. There was a rustling sound nearby. "Maybe we should set up camp here," Noel suggested, her voice quivering slightly. "No way," Jake retorted. "We're not sleeping in wolf territory. Stay quiet and keep moving." A chill ran down my spine. Something was off about these woods. But Jake was drawn to danger. Rash and spontaneous, he always managed to lead us into precarious situations. So like hundreds of times before, we followed him. After some time, we noticed a small clearing up ahead. "See? Perfect spot," Jake declared, halting abruptly as his flashlight illuminated an ancient cabin cloaked in moss and nearly consumed by nature itself. "What is that?" Chris stuttered. I squinted at the side of the crumbling structure, spotting something shiny near a half-open cellar door. "How did this—" My question was interrupted by a spine-chilling moan. It sounded human but warped. We spun around, frantically attempting to locate the source of the sound. Then we saw it. A massive figure shrouded in the fog, striding right toward us. A putrid scent came. It made my eyes tear up and my stomach revolt. Noel screamed. I yelled, "Run!" grabbing Jake's arm and yanking him back toward our path. It was too late. The monstrous creature spotted us and charged toward us on all fours. Its powerful muscles rippled beneath its matted fur, propelling it at a terrifying speed. My heart raced as its heavy footsteps echoed through the forest like a drumbeat. In a frenzy of fear, we sprinted through the dense underbrush. Chris's flashlight beam bobbed over the rugged terrain and fallen logs in our path. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole as we plunged deeper into the forest, our only hope to outrun the beast behind us. We ran for what seemed like hours, my lungs seared with each breath, and my muscles screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop. The thought of being caught by the monster behind us was too terrifying. We zigzagged through the trees, branches whipping at our faces and thorns scratching our skin. The ground beneath us was slick with mud and leaves, making it difficult to maintain our footing. Behind me, my friends struggled to keep up. I closed my eyes and willed myself to run faster. We came to an ancient stone chamber. Not exactly safe, but it would have to do for now. The remnants of a wooden door on rusted hinges were the only thing separating the ominous structure from the outside world. We entered the building, huddling close to one another for comfort and warmth. Above, stray beams of moonlight slipped through a grated opening. In the faint light from a hidden crack, my nightmare slowly came into view. A large trough stretched across the chamber until it turned into a rusted mining cart filled with horrifying contents. Skulls peeking through masses of coagulated tissue, severed limbs piled on top of one another in a gruesome display of desecration. As shock gave way to horrifying realization, I noticed mounds surrounding the cart pulsating rhythmically with raspy echoes, breathing mounds made up of decomposing flesh soaked in blood. Countless they were. A terrifying sea of semi-animate remains groaning in either pain or hunger. I couldn't tell which. They writhed and tore at one another. That gurgling sound that had haunted me from the woods was back, tortured death cries mixed with a sickening sloshing that made the terror so much worse than before. We'd unwittingly taken refuge in a vile slaughterhouse. Drawing a deep breath, I was assaulted by the overpowering stench of decay that instantly churned my insides. My hands instinctively flew to my face, shielding my mouth and nose in an attempt at blocking out the nauseating smell. But it was to no avail. The lingering odor had already taken hold, embedding itself stubbornly within my senses. The heap of horror's attention shifted toward me as if drawn by some monstrous appetite. Pieces of rotten flesh fell away, only to be replaced instantly by regenerating viscera and squirming blood-soaked muscle. Survival instinct kicked in. I clawed my way back to the door. Skeletal fingers reached out from the churning sea of decay, tearing away chunks of flesh as they sought leverage. A monstrous hand broke through the surface ahead, its filthy nails scraping dangerously close to my face as it struggled to pull itself into this realm. I froze when a skull surfaced next, sinew and veined flesh weaving itself across the exposed bone, eyelids unfurling to reveal hollow, lifeless pits. Overcome by fear, I threw myself against the warped wooden door in a desperate attempt to escape. The old wood splintered under my force and momentum, sending me sprawling onto the cold, hard ground. Panting heavily, I squinted through teary eyes at the cavernous underworld before me. The air was thick with the stench of rot and something sickly sweet. An unusual radiance created lengthy, distorted shadows across an expansive maze of roots and deep crevices that appeared to tunnel into the earth's molten heart. The cave walls were damp with a shimmering substance that emitted a mild odor of iron and decay, reflecting the peculiar light in ways that played tricks on our sight. My comrades emerged from my rear, their expressions echoing my astonishment as they absorbed the immense subterranean realm we had stumbled upon. Chris's voice trembled and faltered as he queried, Where are we?" The spectral light throbbed once like a pulse before it intensified, lighting up the moist cave walls. Unnerving symbols and figures had been inscribed in a blood-red fluid that imparted a metallic flavor in my mouth when I unconsciously licked my lips. They were unsettling combinations of human forms, intertwined with monstrous beasts. Abruptly, a low rumble reverberated below us, vibrating through our footwear and rattling us to our very core. A startling sound followed that sent shivers down my spine. The creature was back. It inhaled deeply to pick up my scent, then opened its mouth wide. It let out a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. More skeletal heads appeared from the swirling darkness. I attempted to free myself, but sharp claws dug into my legs, slicing through my jeans and scraping against my skin. A stronger stench of decay filled the air, making me gag as it invaded my nostrils and mouth. Decomposed fingers, their tendons exposed like frayed wires, fumbled under my clothes in an eager attempt at dragging me further into the terrifying dark. I twisted and jerked violently, but for each hand I managed to shake off. Another 3 replaced it. The relentless assault closed in from all sides with the restless force of countless tormented spirits. The sickening smell of rot and dried blood filled my nose, choking me. I knew I was going to die here, in this horrible place. A desperate call for help left my mouth, echoing into the empty silence. Death. It was too complex an idea for someone my age, an unexpected visitor I'd never thought to encounter so soon. I'd never experienced the loss of a loved one. I didn't know what to do. Should I pray or prepare myself for the end? My heart raced, each beat a signal of the looming danger. The atmosphere was loaded with unspoken words and unrealized dreams. The encroaching darkness reached out for me, and I stood on the edge of nothingness with only despair for company. Alone, abandoned, afraid. As darkness engulfed me, a cold sensation dragged me deeper into the abyss. My hand brushed against something hard and round, a skull hidden in the grime. Just before my vision was completely obscured by rotting flesh, I heard my friends' terrified screams for the last time, drowned out by countless decaying voices. The empty was cold and damp, pressing in from all sides and stealing my breath. An endless expanse stretched before me, filled with constant pressure and a transformation more frightening than death itself. I attempted to call for help, for mercy, for an end to this nightmare. But the only sound that returned was the continuous moans of lost souls sighing in the dark tomb. And somewhere within that haunting noise, my pained cries eventually found their voice. The deafening grind of the subway car's brakes yanked Mia from her daydream. The sudden jolt forced her eyes open, and she found herself staring into the captivating gaze of a man who radiated an irresistible allure. He was a tower of mystery, his grin seemingly dissolving the tight knots of tension that filled the subway car. "May I?" His voice was silky and warm. Mia nodded silently, her heart drumming rhythmically in her chest as he settled beside her. His cologne enveloped her, a potent blend of exotic spices and a smoky undertone that played with her senses. "I'm Luke," he said, extending a hand toward her. "Mia," she responded. His touch ignited sparks that danced beneath her skin. Their conversation flowed effortlessly for hours, each passing station becoming insignificant blurs in their periphery. Mia found herself revealing dreams and fears that had been securely tucked away within the recesses of her mind for years. Luke listened intently, his gaze never wavering. As they approached Mia's stop, disappointment washed over her. She yearned to stretch this moment out indefinitely. Luke seemed to read her thoughts. "Fancy a drink?" Ignoring the faint whispering of caution at the back of her mind, Mia agreed. One drink spiraled into several more. Inhibitions fell away as easily as their clothes did later that night when they stumbled into Mia's apartment. Luke's touch sparked every nerve ending in Mia's body like fireworks. Overwhelmed by pleasure, she surrendered completely to the intoxicating euphoria passing between them. In the calm after their passion-fueled frenzy, Luke traced strange symbols onto Mia's skin, symbols that glowed briefly before disappearing. Was it the alcohol or the flickering candles that were playing tricks on her mind? Their affair quickly escalated. Stolen kisses in dimly lit alleyways and sleepless nights tangled in the sheets. Mia had never felt so exhilaratingly alive, so passionately desired. As time passed, Luke's appearance altered. His eyes would sometimes flicker a disconcerting red hue under specific lighting conditions, and his touch became almost unbearably hot. The symbols he traced seemed to linger longer each time, pulsating with an eerie energy. Then, without any warning or explanation, Luke vanished. Mia searched tirelessly for him, trawling through subways, revisiting their usual spots. But it was as if he had ceased to exist. Heartbroken and confused, Mia threw herself into her work. But dreams of Luke haunted her nights, visions filled with fire and darkness. 2 months after Luke's disappearance, Mia missed her period. A pregnancy test confirmed her growing suspicion. Panic seized her. It was impossible. They'd been so careful. As the signs of pregnancy became more evident, strange occurrences unfolded around her. Objects moved on their own. Shadows seemed to dance at the edges of her vision. An unrelenting heat wave gripped her apartment, despite blasting the air conditioning. Her dreams became vivid nightmares featuring Luke atop a mountain of skulls with flaming wings spread wide behind him, his teeth gleaming menacingly as he smiled at her. "Soon, love," his voice echoed ominously in the dream. "Our child will herald a new era." Mia awoke screaming each time, drenched in a cold sweat that clung to her skin like dewdrops. Desperate for answers, Mia dug into ancient texts and obscure online occult forums. The horrifying truth slowly revealed itself. The symbols that Luke traced were binding sigils, tying her soul to his. His disappearance coincided with the Feast of the Fallen, when the boundary between realms thinned significantly, and he was known by many names. Luke, Lucifer, the Morning Star, the devil himself. A chilling realization sank in. She wasn't just pregnant, she was carrying the Antichrist. She thought about terminating the pregnancy, but every clinic she approached met with inexplicable accidents right before her appointments. Unexplained fires, structural collapses, sudden deaths. The message was clear. This child would be born, regardless of her wishes. As she neared full term, paranormal activities intensified in Mia's apartment. Furniture flew across rooms, mirrors shattered and then reformed, displaying hellish landscapes. The walls bled, staining the floors a deep crimson. Mia confined herself to her apartment, terrified of the outside world. She subsisted on delivered food, watching in horror as her belly grew larger and more distorted. On the night of the winter solstice, her water broke. She was in excruciating pain, each contraction taking her breath away and leaving her gasping. The lights flickered off and candles lit spontaneously, casting an eerie glow all around her. The temperature spiked high enough to blister the paint off the walls. Another contraction tore through Mia and she screamed in agony. The floor split beneath her feet, releasing a plume of foul-smelling smoke that burned her eyes and clogged her throat. A figure stepped out from the shadows, Luke, but not as she remembered him. His charismatic mask was now a strikingly stunning being. His smooth skin glistened like polished obsidian, radiating in the flickering candlelight, and his eyes blazed with infernal fire. "Well done, love," he crooned. "Our child is coming." Mia attempted to escape, but another contraction hit her hard. She felt the baby descend. Luke knelt beside her and placed a hand on her distended belly, which turned translucent, revealing their monstrous offspring within. It was far from human, with sharp teeth, razor-like claws, and folded wings tucked tightly against its tiny body. "Oh God," Mia sobbed desperately. "Please don't do this." Luke's grin was an icy sculpture of satisfaction. "Our world has decayed, turned sour and foul. It screams for purification. Our offspring will herald the sunrise of upheaval and renewal," he whispered into her ear. "And you, my love, will be its trumpet." Mia's scream echoed through the room as the final contraction took hold. Her body surrendered to the unrelenting power of the being growing inside her, with muscles and tendons giving way as it passed through. The creature burst forth in a torrent of ruby-red blood and translucent fluid, revealing wings of coarse hide that stretched wider than seemed feasible. Its talons scraped against the oak floorboards with each tentative movement. Luke cradled the grotesque newborn, whispering gently in a language so alien it made Mia's eardrums pulse. The infant, such a term felt pitifully inadequate, cooed back at him, its eyes blazing with the same intense fire. "Behold," Luke proclaimed, "the one destined to shatter the 7 seals, the harbinger of ruin." He glanced at Mia, still hemorrhaging on the wooden planks. "Now comes your revelation." His hand gestured over her, and Mia's body began to alter, her skin shifting into a metallic hue. Bones stretching, joints snapping into a new alignment. Mia's groans morphed into primal roars as wings burst through her back, tearing muscles and skin alike. Her jaw lengthened, and her teeth became lethal daggers. The metamorphosis was swift, leaving an unholy amalgamation of woman and demon. "Arise, Harbinger," Luke commanded. "The world is waiting." As dawn broke, New York City was drenched in a warm glow. But the serene morning was abruptly interrupted by a horrifying screech that echoed through the skyscrapers. The city's residents looked up in fear as a grotesque creature with wings tore across the sky, a demon child clutched in its claws. The end of mankind had been initiated. Beneath the Earth's surface, Luke's smile widened with grim satisfaction. His wicked plan was unfolding perfectly. Mia, unaware of her pivotal role, had executed it without fault. He watched through countless eyes as his harbinger and spawn unleashed chaos on the city. Buildings collapsed into rubble. Streets ran red with blood. Screams filled the air along with the bitter smell of burning sulfur. Before long, the fire would ravage the world. From its remains, a new order would rise under Luke's rule. His laughter reverberated within his infernal abode. The game was over. Humanity didn't stand a chance. Amidst her apartment's wreckage lay a single photograph, young Mia grinning innocently at the camera, completely oblivious to her impending doom. She had no idea that her destiny was sealed when she encountered an alluring stranger on a subway train. Flames devoured the photograph, eradicating Mia's last shred of human identity. Her monstrous wails echoed from afar, signaling imminent destruction. The apocalypse had hit New York City hard and fast. Dragging my suitcase onto an unclean bed, I felt fatigue seeping into my bones. The dim light barely helped as I groped for the switch. A flicker in the overhead bulb lit up reluctantly, throwing a dull yellow glow on the flaky wallpaper and a carpet with an unsettling stain. Dismissing a sudden chill, I turned my attention to the nightstand. A Gideon Bible lay there, its cover weathered by time and disregard. It fell open to reveal a hastily written warning. "Beware of management. They're aware." My skin tightened. This secluded mountain lodge was far from the peaceful retreat I sought. The note unsettled me. I attempted to disregard it as a joke, but the unease lingered. Sleep came quickly but was filled with disturbing dreams. When morning arrived, the carpet stain was more noticeable in the daylight. I brought up my concerns to Silas, the lodge manager. His dismissive response did nothing to ease my worries. The lodge was unusually quiet, but Silas chalked it up to being off-peak. The day passed in a surreal silence, broken only by the wind outside. I spent my time exploring the large building and its many rooms. As evening approached, I ventured into the nearby woods. The fog rolled in, obscuring the path. I felt alone. My phone provided a measure of light until the battery began to die. A sudden scream sounded, causing a ripple of fear to surge within me. The sound was not that of an animal. It was something far more menacing. Panicked, I ran back to the lodge, slamming the door shut behind me. I collapsed into a chair in the lobby. Another scream echoed from upstairs. I grabbed a fireplace poker and climbed the staircase. The air grew colder with each step, and there was a faint metallic smell wafting in the air. Upstairs, I found utter chaos, furniture overturned and clothes strewn about on the blood-soaked carpets. But what horrified me most was seeing the body of a dead woman lying on the floor. Fear gave way to survival, and escape became my priority. I hurriedly packed my belongings. Silas's cold voice sounded behind me. "Leaving so soon?" He smiled unnervingly, his eyes glowing an eerie shade of orange. What the hell was going on here? A tidal wave of recollection swept over me, nearly knocking me off my feet. The crimson stain of blood, the absence of other guests, the chill from the unlit fireplace. Something dreadful had happened at this isolated lodge. Silas sprang at me like a feral beast, his gnarled fingers clawing through the air. With adrenaline pumping like molten fire in my veins, I fled into the tangle of hallways. Silas's guttural snarls ricocheted off the cold walls, each echo reminding me of the predator hot on my heels. Survival was not just a goal now. It was a primal need that drowned out all other thoughts. I had to get out of there. A sudden memory hit me hard. The grand hall with its unused fireplace. It gave me a sliver of hope. I dashed through the huge wooden doors, Silas close behind. Time was running out. I toppled over an end table, the lamp on top providing a much-needed distraction that would buy me seconds at most. Silas stumbled, briefly thrown off by the obstacle. Seizing this opportunity, I grabbed the fire poker and slammed the heavy iron grate shut, trapping a log inside the stone hearth. My plan was a gamble and banked on the old tales of fire cleansing evil. A roar filled the room as flames engulfed the trapped log. Silas instinctively recoiled, an unholy light from the blaze forcing him to let out an agonized howl. He hammered at his flaming prison with monstrous force, managing to bend it but failing to snuff out its burning heart. His furious bellows turned into spine-tingling screams as he shrank and dissolved into dark wisps that were swallowed by a fiery whirlwind. The grate fell open, remnants of charred wood still glowing from inside it. A heavy silence settled around me as a wave of exhaustion hit, causing my legs to give way beneath me. I fell onto the old wooden boards. As shock faded, disgust washed over me, coupled with a grim reality. I had witnessed and narrowly escaped a horrifying ritual. Daylight poured through the dirty windows as I stumbled out of the great hall. Biting mountain winds tore at my skin. Silas was gone, consumed by fire, but his evil home remained. I followed the winding mountain trail, unmoved by the beautiful views around me. Snow-capped peaks accented the soft pink hues of the sunrise. It felt like a cruel mockery after what I had endured. While the authorities dismissed my story, they couldn't ignore the deserted lodge and its dead resident. Their official conclusion was an accidental death caused by a tragic gas leak. Typical. But I knew better. That lodge was a tomb and gateway to unimaginable evil. In the coming weeks, nightmares haunted me relentlessly. Snippets of the ritual, images of Silas's monstrous form. I am constantly reminded of the hidden evil and the unsettling fact that there are beings beyond our understanding waiting to enter our world. The experience has left a lasting mark on my soul, and though I survived, I am forever changed and always on guard. The peaceful quiet was suddenly broken by the creaking of old floorboards. The calm lullaby from the baby monitor was replaced with a jarring noise that made my heart race. Sharon was supposed to be gone, leaving the nursery silent, but the creaking noise grew louder. I grabbed the baseball bat from behind our bedroom door and slowly headed toward the nursery. Each step I took caused another floorboard to squeak. The strange noises stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence. When I entered the room ready to fight, everything looked normal. The rocking horse was still, its painted eyes staring straight ahead. "Dada," Sharon's voice came through static on the monitor. "Sharon, where are you?" A deep voice replied, "Come find her." Fear took over as I called my mother-in-law. "Is Sharon there?" Her answer brought relief but also confusion. If Sharon was safe, who or what was in our house? A giggle came from inside the closet. I shuddered in response, an icy chill flittering along my spine. When I opened the closet door, it was empty. A childlike whisper said, "Peekaboo," directly into my ear, causing me to swing at nothing with my bat. Laughter echoed through the house as they chanted my name in a creepy invitation to play their game. Panic set in and I ran out of the nursery. Their ghostly banter followed me. I attempted to dial 911 but got nothing but static on the line. Ghostly children watched me from the staircase. Some smiled wickedly while others cried black tears that evaporated when they touched the floor. "Play with us," they said together. "Stay forever." A cold hand touched my shoulder, and when I turned around, a pale boy with hollow eyes said, "Tag, you're it." I ran into our bedroom, and my mirror reflection was gray and gaunt, the eyes glowing with an unnatural light. What the hell was wrong with me? "You're becoming one of us," my reflection replied. The door opened slowly. I backed away until I was trapped in a corner. "Hide and seek, Dada. Come find us." It felt like a dream. It couldn't be real. There was no logical explanation for any of it. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately hoping that when I opened them again, this surreal experience would disappear, and I'd find myself waking up from a deep sleep. A small hand touched my cheek. "Silly Dada," Sharon's voice echoed all around me. "You can't wake up if you haven't been sleeping." When my eyes opened, I saw a strange creature wearing my daughter's face like a mask. "Who are you?" "We are the Forgotten Ones," it answered. "Lost spirits just like you." "Lost spirits," I repeated, looking at my hands. They glowed and were semi-transparent. "Are you saying I'm dead?" The entity, with Sharon's innocent face, smiled wickedly. "Yes, Dada. You've been one of us for a while now." Hearing this from something that looked like Sharon was hard to accept. "I don't remember." "Death can mess with your memory," it said, studying me closely. "Don't worry, we'll help you remember." Ghostly shapes pulled me into a dizzying tour of the house, through rooms that felt both foreign and familiar. Each room told a story, some filled with joy and laughter, others heavy with sadness and sorrow. These were echoes of lives lived within these walls. "Many of us used to live in this house," the Sharon creature explained, as we walked down a narrow hallway lined with old photos covered in dust particles. "We're not bound by physical limits anymore, but we're still tied to this place." The hallway ended at a room full of worn-out furniture. There was an armchair next to a cold, dark fireplace. "This was your favorite spot," it said, pointing at the armchair. "You used to sit here for hours reading bedtime stories till Sharon fell asleep." I stared at the chair and slowly started remembering. The smell of burning wood filled my nostrils, and I could almost hear Sharon's laughter echoing in my ears. A mix of longing and sadness washed over me. "When we die, we don't remember everything right away," the creature further explained. "But eventually we remember our lives, our loved ones, and how we died." "How did I die?" I asked quietly. The Sharon creature tilted its head again, its face twisted into a strange expression of sympathy. "You don't remember anything? Not even the pain or fear?" I shook my head, feeling a cold wave of fear. "It was a car crash," she said softly, her voice echoing as if it were sounding from far away. "You were coming back from work. It happened suddenly." Images flashed in front of me. Myself driving through heavy rain, the blinding lights of an oncoming car speeding toward me, the intense pain. I closed my eyes tightly, attempting to block out the terrible memories. I don't want to remember," I stuttered. The entity stared at me for a moment before saying, "That's okay. You have all eternity to remember, or forget." In an instant, we were back in the nursery, lit by a soft light that made the room glow, an unexpected comfort in this strange reality. The rocking chair moved on its own while moonlight shone through the window, creating shadow patterns on an old rug underneath. My eyes landed on an empty crib where Sharon's teddy bear lay forgotten, another sad reminder of what used to be. I could almost hear her bubbly laughter filling up the room, her small hands reaching out for me. "Remember us like this, Dada?" a voice echoed around me. "Remember us happy." As the echo faded away, I found myself alone in the nursery again, surrounded by ghostly memories and echoes of a life that was once mine. The highway stretched before us, a barren ribbon of black under the hostile glare of our headlights. The radio's static hum had long since faded into an oppressive silence, leaving only the rhythmic screech of rubber against asphalt to fill the void. The air tasted metallic and cold, like fear. Each breath I took was a struggle against the dread that coiled tight in my gut. "Alex, are we on track?" Jessica's voice cut through the quiet. She held a paper map in her hands, its edges crinkling under her anxious grip. In the age of GPS and digital convenience, it seemed archaic. But out in rural Georgia, where cell phone signals were as elusive as ghost stories, it was our sole lifeline. "We have no other choice," I replied tersely, my fingers white-knuckled around the steering wheel. Our journey from Atlanta had begun with excitement, a surprise visit to my parents' lakeside cabin, but now felt more like a descent into some grim fairy tale. Without warning, a figure emerged from the darkness at the road's edge, a hitchhiker's arm extended, pale and pleading, into our path. With an oath and a sharp swerve of the wheel, I narrowly avoided a collision. My heart pounded like war drums in my chest as I checked the rearview mirror. A woman stood alone on the barren highway. "Alex, stop," Jessica implored urgently. "We can't just leave her." Despite every horror movie cliché screaming at me not to stop for strangers on deserted roads late at night, I found myself putting the car into reverse. The stranger climbed into our back seat with an ethereal presence that sent chills down my spine. Her skin clung tightly to her bones beneath tattered remnants of what might once have been a sundress, while her eyes darted nervously between us. "I'm Jessica. This is Alex," Jessica said gently, her voice soothing in the tense silence. "What's your name? What happened?" "Lily," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. She told us about a fight with her boyfriend during their camping trip and how he had left her alone. As we continued our journey, Lily shared more about their ill-fated expedition, an online discovered campsite that proved to be nothing but desolate woods and a stagnant lake. Her story took an eerie turn as she spoke of strange occurrences and anomalies in the water, fish with surplus eyes and misplaced teeth. A sign for Whispering Pines Lake appeared as we crested a hill. Our destination was within reach, but as I indicated to make the turn, Lily let out a terrified cry. "No, that's it, the campsite, don't go there." Her panic was tangible, filling the car with an icy dread. "But this is where we grew up, it's where our parents live," Jessica retorted, bewilderment heavy in her tone. Before we could digest Lily's reaction, Jessica announced that she finally had a signal on her phone. As she began dialing, blinding headlights flared in our rearview mirror, followed by the guttural roar of an engine. The world spun as metal crunched against metal and sent us spiraling toward the lake's edge. Through our shattered windshield, I saw him, a man stumbling from a truck with an unsteady gait. Even in the dim light, I recognized him. Tom. "Found you," he slurred menacingly, brandishing a filleting knife. Lily whimpered in terror while I frantically tried to shift into gear. But before I could act, another impact hit us, sending our car plunging into the icy depths of Whispering Pines Lake. The abrupt plunge of our car into the icy lake felt like a fist to my stomach, the chill water rushing in with a brutal shock. I wrestled with my seatbelt, fingers turning numb against the cold metal. Jessica thrashed beside me until her movements abruptly ceased. I tried to yell out, but only gulped down a mouthful of the bitter, algae-laced water. Something rough and solid scraped against my calf. In a panic, I kicked out and fortuitously struck the door handle. As our vehicle continued its descent into the depths, I pushed myself upward until it seemed like my lungs would burst from lack of oxygen. When I broke through to the surface, gasping for air, relief washed over me like a comforting blanket. The shore was tantalizingly close. Tom stood there, his face twisted in horror as our car vanished beneath the undulating surface of the lake. Exhausted but driven by adrenaline, I dragged myself onto the rocky shoreline where Tom was knee-deep in water, surrounded by figures that moved with an uncanny fluidity that marked them as non-human. One latched onto his leg and he screamed before being yanked under. Fear lent wings to my feet and propelled me into the forest until exhaustion claimed me. Shivering from cold and fatigue, nauseous from fear and shock, I collapsed near some lights flickering on a sign that read, "Whispering Pines Genetics, authorized personnel only." In that moment of clarity amidst chaos, I realized that what we thought were innocent cabins and campsites were nothing more than clever fronts for whatever unspeakable experiments were happening here. And Lily, sweet Lily, must have been part of their twisted plot. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run far away from this place as fast as possible, fatigue won out and forced me to rest against a tree trunk where sleep eventually came. I woke to hushed voices rustling through the leaves, and a man informing me that Jessica hadn't survived, but Tom was holding on. They also mentioned Jessica had been pregnant, and her unborn child would be valuable for their research. My eyes flickered open to see men in hazmat suits looming over me. One scanned my abdomen with a device and announced, "Fetus still viable," before ordering an immediate extraction. I tried to resist as they hoisted me onto a gurney, but my body refused to obey my commands. Under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights in sterile corridors, a woman in a lab coat approached me. Her eyes were devoid of warmth or empathy behind safety goggles. She nonchalantly informed me that my unborn child had already started adapting to the mutagen and would be their best specimen yet. I wanted to scream at her, tell her that my unborn baby was not hers to experiment with, that Jessica and our child weren't lab rats for her twisted experiments, but no words came out. She swabbed my arm with alcohol before plunging a needle into it. The sting was sharp, then everything faded into nothingness. Pain brought me back from oblivion. I wiped away tears as I looked at them, my children, lying in their clear incubators. I was shocked that there was more than one. Something was wrong. My daughter's skin began sprouting scales while my son's eyes took on an amphibian-like appearance. A familiar deep voice praised me. It was my father, the esteemed geneticist I'd always admired. He seemed proud of his grandchildren as if they were his crowning achievement. "Dad," I managed to say through clenched teeth, "why?" He turned toward me and for a moment he looked regretful before saying, "For the greater good, Alexandria. You'll understand someday." The following days passed in a haze of pain and recovery while I attempted to make sense of what was happening around me. They allowed me to see my kids occasionally. They were changing at an alarming rate. My son developed gills that moved rhythmically with each breath. My daughter's skin could mimic her surroundings. They were awe-inspiring and terrifying. I knew I had to escape, so one night during a thunderstorm, I seized the opportunity when the guard was distracted. I swiped his keycard off a hook on the wall and sprinted through the echoing hallways. Alarms wailed as I made my way to the nursery where my children were housed. I wrapped them in blankets and ran barefoot into the stormy night toward the lake. At its edge, fear gripped me as my children squirmed, their gills fluttering and their skin blending with the dark water. They were no longer human, but they were still mine. I stepped into the icy water, feeling it lap against my legs as strange figures emerged around us. But I wasn't afraid. Instead, I hoped to introduce my children to their new environment. "Be free," I whispered through sobs as they disappeared into the water. This was where they belonged, far from Whispering Pines among others like themselves. After freeing my children, I did what seemed sensible at that moment. I hitchhiked to Virginia, a long way away from Georgia, but not far enough for comfort. Every news report about environmental issues or genetic advancements makes me wonder how many are just covers for what's truly happening beneath tranquil lakes and streams across our country. They'll find me eventually. My father has extensive resources, but by then, hopefully, journalists and watchdog organizations will have received evidence of his horrifying experiments that I've sent them. The truth about Whispering Pines and its monstrosities masquerading as progress will be revealed eventually. And if they apprehend me before everything is exposed, that's fine. My children are safe in that lake, and who knows, maybe they are our future. The steel guitar's metallic twang reverberated through the bar, sending a shiver down the spines of the patrons perched on worn-out leather stools. Ben Callahan was at the helm, his calloused fingers coaxing out each note as if he were whispering a delicious secret. His eyes remained closed, his entire being consumed by his craft. A prominent figure in Austin's bustling music scene, Ben's adept knowledge of writing country lyrics and playing the guitar had a magnetic pull on audiences. However, tonight was different. An electrifying tension replaced the usual laid-back atmosphere, creating an air of expectancy. As Ben strummed a Hank Williams melody, an eerie silence fell upon the crowd. All eyes focused on him, fascinated yet disconcerted by such a raw exposition of emotion. His bandmates exchanged apprehensive glances. They too sensed something amiss about tonight's performance. When the song reached its crescendo, Ben played with such intensity that the notes cascaded over the room like a soaking rain during a tempest. The audience watched in reverence until an unforeseen occurrence jolted them from their trance. The lights flickered and dimmed. An unsettling glow cast long shadows across the room. Ben's eyes snapped open, revealing a chilling gaze that hinted at hidden darkness. A sinister grin spread across his face as he crooned his tune to the mesmerized spectators. "Problem?" he taunted, his demeanor laced with ice and intimidation. "Never heard the devil's music before?" The laughter ceased and silence blanketed the bar. Ben scanned the room, zeroing in on a young woman in the front row. "You," he crooned. "Come join me, honey." Terrified, the lady just stared at Ben like a deer caught in headlights. Before she could respond, Ben leaped off stage, his guitar swinging from his shoulder. The sea of patrons parted as he approached her, looks of pure and palpable terror on their faces. Ben stroked her cheek in a gesture far too intimate for someone he'd never met. His grin widened as he murmured, "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. What's your name, sweetheart?" The woman trembled beneath this touch as she whispered, "Peggy." "Peggy." Ben paused for a moment as if he were letting the name grow on him. Then he asked, "Would you like to sing with me, Peggy?" "I can't," she started, seemingly entranced by his very presence. "I can't sing." "Of course you can," Ben crooned in response. Extending his hand to her in invitation, he whispered, "Come." The crowd sighed as Ben and Peggy made their way onto the stage. An eerie fog settled over everyone as the couple sat, Ben on a stool and Peggy perched atop his lap. Ben Callahan's skilled hands moved deftly over the cold metal strings of his guitar, producing a melody so powerful it energized the room. Peggy, an average-looking woman with striking blue eyes, was captivated by him. His breath carried the smell of whiskey and peppermint as he leaned in to whisper, "Trust me on this one, sweetheart." The chords were unfamiliar to Peggy, but they awakened an instinctive beat within her that matched Ben's melody. Following a lyric sheet she'd gotten from Ben, Peggy started to sing, her voice unsure at first but gaining confidence with each measure. As Ben's fingers picked up the tempo, the music filled every nook of the bar. Peggy's voice floated effortlessly along each note, eliciting soft sighs from the captivated crowd. The performance was seductive, forming an emotional connection between the couple and their audience. Then came the peak. A deep strum from Ben's guitar met with a soulful cry from Peggy. Suddenly, everything went black. When light flooded back into the room moments later, Peggy was gone, leaving Ben alone on stage. After a moment of stunned silence, Ben said, "That was something," before packing his things and heading outside to his pickup truck. Driving past city limits toward his secluded home hidden in the woods, Ben relished in the fact that tonight's spectacle would be discussed for years, spreading stories of his legend throughout Austin. His reputation would increase with every recounting of the night's events. He would be both feared and respected. News of the horrifying incident spread rapidly through Austin and the surrounding area, instigating a city-wide manhunt for Ben Callahan, but he had vanished without a trace. His music, once the bringer of joy, now evoked fear tainted by death. The eerie strumming of his guitar became Austin's recurring nightmare, and an unsettling reminder of the danger imminent in a city renowned for its vibrant live music scene. Lena Reeves, the seasoned captain of a deep-sea expedition team, squinted into the inky depths through the submersible's thick glass portal. The vessel's halogen beams sliced through the abyss, highlighting a hulking shape resting on the ocean floor. Her lips curled into a grim smile as she murmured, "The SS Orpheus," her breath fogging the window pane. A chill seeped into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the thrill coursing her veins. Beside her, Dr. Nate Chen leaned closer to the window, his dark eyes gleaming with anticipation under his spectacles. His voice barely more than a whisper. He exhaled a sigh of relief and said, "At last." Months of relentless research and countless sleepless nights had led them to this precise location, the final resting place of the Orpheus. A ship that mysteriously vanished in 1939, carrying invaluable artifacts from a bygone era. It lay hidden beneath 2 miles of crushing sea pressure and darkness. As they maneuvered the submersible toward the forsaken wreck, Lena observed clouds of silt swirling around them, like ghostly apparitions before melting into nothingness. Nate gasped at an enormous gash torn across Orpheus's rust-eaten hull, the edges jagged and cruel, resembling monstrous claw marks. He turned wide-eyed to Lena and asked, "What could have caused this?" Lena shrugged, her gaze fixed on the colossal wound before them. "Let's inch closer," she suggested, "and use our robotic arms for a thorough examination." With deft precision, they navigated the submersible alongside Orpheus's spectral silhouette as Jake Thompson, their communications officer, operated the robotic arms with high-resolution cameras and state-of-the-art sampling tools. The cameras revealed once opulent corridors, now overrun by seaweed and coral formations, clinging to the rusted railings. Schools of fish darted away from the intrusive lights as they delved deeper into the ship. Cargo doors hung askew, and the crates scattered across rotting floors were chilling reminders of a long-forgotten time. A large figure looming in the gloom startled Nate. It was a statue, a bronze representation of Cthulhu with an octopus head. They ventured further into the ship's interior, where Jake used one robotic arm to lift a golden disc etched with cryptic symbols. "Sumerian," Nate whispered, the breath hitching in his throat. Suddenly, Lena's attention was diverted by a faint sound, an eerie, yet captivating melody that seemed to echo from the ship itself. An overwhelming urge seized her to open the hatch and let the sea claim them. Nate's hand shot out, gripping her arm, pulling her back from danger. His eyes were wide with fear as he shouted, "Lena! No!" Shaking off the strange compulsion, she commanded, "Let's salvage what we can and get out of here." They employed the robotic arms to meticulously collect artifacts, storing them securely in the submersible's external compartments. As Jake delicately handled another golden disc, a hissing noise filled their ears. The surface team's panicked voices cut through static before abruptly going silent. Lena and Nate shared a glance, their eyes reflecting the same fear intensified by the eerie glow of the water. The ascent protocol was activated, but the controls failed to respond. Jake's eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for an escape route that wasn't there. He swallowed hard, then said, "We're trapped," each word carrying the weight of their dire situation. Lena shook her head. "We need to conserve power and oxygen. Let's shut down non-essential systems and wait for rescue." The submersible shuddered violently, its metallic skeleton groaning under the invisible strain of the deep sea pressure. "What was that?" Jake's inquiry floated in the claustrophobic cabin, his voice a whisper against the steady hum of the machinery. Outside their tiny porthole, an indistinct figure took form in the inky blackness. A silhouette emerged from the void, its features concealed by a writhing mass of tentacles that danced like serpents in slow motion. Nate let out a strangled cry. Lena fought to keep her rising terror at bay. "It's not real," she forced out through gritted teeth. "We're suffering from oxygen deprivation. It's playing wicked games with our perception." But as she spoke, the phantom shape outside grew larger, its shadowy form enveloping their vessel like a monstrous predator closing in on its prey. The last thing Lena remembered was an eerie sensation, as if those imagined tentacles were drilling into her mind, sowing seeds of madness before everything plunged into darkness. When she jerked awake later, she found herself cocooned within the sterile confines of a decompression chamber. Nate sat beside her, his face etched with fatigue, but tinged with a palpable relief. He narrated their ordeal, how a carbon monoxide leak had induced hallucinations just moments before they were rescued from their faltering vessel deep beneath the ocean surface. "We're safe now, so you just rest well," Nate intoned, the words dripping with a sinister undertone reverberating around them. He stood, the creak of the chair sounding in the quiet room. Lena's gaze fell upon the anomaly on his neck, an area of skin that didn't quite blend with its surroundings. It caught and reflected the meager light in the room, creating an eerie luminescence. The patch of skin reminded her more of fish scales than human flesh. The sight sent a shiver down her spine, the icy fingers tracing their way down her back. The taste of fear hung in the back of her throat, the sensation metallic and sharp. Nate's eyes flickered, reflecting an almost reptilian quality. They glowed briefly with an unholy light that hinted at something otherworldly lurking beneath his human shell. His pupils narrowed into vertical slits before reverting to their usual round shape. In that fleeting moment, Lena felt a wave of nausea roll over her stomach. His scent changed too, the comforting smell of soap and warmth becoming the stench of something primal and unsettling. She blinked rapidly and swallowed hard, attempting to process what was happening. A heavy weight settled in her stomach, and unease gnawed at her gut. For a brief, terrifying moment, she glimpsed something monstrous hidden beneath Nate's human-like exterior. Lena didn't dare move, rooted to the place she lay, her heart pounding against her ribcage. As his neck slowly returned to normal, Lena couldn't help but wonder what secrets Nate had brought back with him from the dark depths below. Jessica's fingers fluttered over her phone screen, the pulsating rhythm of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The repetitive motion of swiping left and right was almost hypnotic. An unending parade of potential partners blurred into an indistinguishable collage until one face seized her attention. David, 35, a lawyer with eyes so piercing they seemed to shatter the pixelated confines of her screen. Her breath hitched as she swiped right. An instant match. Their conversation flowed like a river, messages cascading back and forth as minutes turned into hours. David was a puzzle, his words intriguingly cryptic yet compellingly intense. They agreed to rendezvous at an upscale bar nestled between towering skyscrapers downtown. Arriving before their agreed time, Jessica ordered herself a whiskey, the smoky aroma and sharp taste serving to steady her jittery nerves. The entrance door creaked open, revealing David in person. He was even more captivating than his digital representation, tall with a sharply defined jawline and an aura that radiated predatory elegance. His gaze found hers across the room, a smile full of intrigue tugging at his lips. "Jessica," he purred appreciatively, "you're exquisite." A blush bloomed across her cheeks as their conversation flowed seamlessly. Time passed unnoticed until the bartender's deep voice echoed through the dimly lit space announcing the last call. Leaning close enough for his warm breath to tease her earlobe, David whispered an invitation, "Come home with me." Jessica's usually cautious nature was temporarily overridden by the alcohol coursing through her veins, causing indecision to take root in her mind. Despite this, she mustered up the courage to nod in agreement. They stumbled into the cool night air toward David's minimalist apartment, where crystal glasses filled with amber liquid awaited them. Jessica's head spun with intoxication as David's urgent and passionate kiss overwhelmed her like a carousel ride. Clothes were discarded hastily as they collapsed onto his bed together, their physical connection rough yet thrillingly primal. But something felt off. A sharp twinge of pain threaded with pleasure made Jessica push him away and demand him to stop. Ignoring her plea, David's fangs descended from his mouth as his eyes glowed crimson in the dimly lit room. He bit into Jessica's neck, and her vision blurred before an all-consuming darkness swallowed everything. She awoke to a blazing pain coursing through her body, shackled in a windowless room with damp stone walls. David entered the room with a chilling smile. "Welcome back," he said casually. "What have you done to me?" Jessica asked, struggling against her restraints. "I made you better, stronger, immortal," he replied smugly. Understanding dawned on Jessica, and she whispered the word that embodied her new reality: vampire. David confirmed her realization and revealed his orders had come from above. A woman named Lilith entered the room, regal yet terrifying, claiming to be Jessica's new mother, and revealing a prophecy that labeled Jessica as the Chosen. Before Jessica could question further, agonizing pain surged through her body as it reshaped itself to fit its new vampiric form. Lilith declared the transformation complete. Jessica was overwhelmed by heightened senses and an insatiable hunger. David unchained her and led her into a grand chamber filled with other vampires who watched as a terrified human was offered to satiate Jessica's newfound thirst. She lunged forward, driven by instinct, and sank her fangs into him. As the hot liquid flowed into her mouth, the crowd of vampires cheered. Lilith praised Jessica, forewarning her of the impending war. As she immersed herself in this intricate realm of age-old rivalries, political plotting, and prophesied fates, it all centered around one unique person, a human-turned-vampire chosen to lead their species against their archenemies, or werewolves. The days melded as she navigated this intricate world. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest, a staccato rhythm that echoed her disbelief. Her world had shifted, upended by an awakening of supernatural abilities that defied logic. Skepticism wilted as she found herself outrunning the wind itself, her speed a blur against the landscape. She fought men who boasted of their physical strength and found them lacking in comparison to her newfound power. The warm rays of the sun were gentle on her skin, not leaving behind the blistering heat that her kind once feared. The silver trinkets that were once a threat now hung harmlessly around her neck as mere decorations. Jessica had learned to embrace her unusual heritage and found comfort among those who shared her blood. A strange family connected not by human relationships, but by something ancient and otherworldly. The changing of seasons marked the passing of time, each day bringing them closer to an inevitable conflict that loomed over their lives like a dark shroud. Jessica honed her prowess with relentless vigor. Each swing of the sword, every leap and dodge, was a step toward readiness. David had entered her life as a stranger, but soon became both a confidant and lover. In him, she placed unwavering trust, an error of judgment she would soon regret. As the night before battle approached, a formidable force of vampires gathered under Jessica's leadership, ready to fight and win with her guidance. In contrast, werewolves emerged from the darkness on the other side of the battlefield, their fur glinting under the light of the full moon, showing off their fearsome fangs. Jessica lifted her hand high above the crowd, ready to signal the assault when an agonizing howl sounded, not from the wolves' ranks but from behind. Whirling around in shock, Jessica watched David convulse, his bones snapping audibly as fur sprouted from his skin. He morphed into a grotesque wolf before her eyes, the revelation of his true nature twisting like a knife in her heart. Chaos ensued as vampires clashed with werewolves. The earth beneath their feet drank deep of spilled blood. In shock and confusion, Jessica was frozen in place as her beliefs shattered before her. A massive black wolf crept closer, the leader of the pack. But then, the animal transformed into a man who called himself Thorn. "You've been hoodwinked," he said calmly. Jessica lunged at him in fury, but Thorn sidestepped effortlessly. "Hear me out," he implored. "You've misconstrued your destiny." "What do you mean?" she demanded. Thorn looked straight into her eyes. "Your role isn't to lead vampires to victory, it's to broker peace." Doubt seeped into Jessica's thoughts. But how? "By bridging the divide," Thorn replied, his voice carrying an undercurrent of hope. Lilith's voice cut through the din. "Deception. Slay him, Jessica." Torn between loyalties, Jessica closed her eyes and delved into her inner self. Power coursed through her veins like a raging river. Her eyes snapped open, radiating a pure white light. "Enough!" she bellowed with an ethereal tone that silenced the battlefield. Eyes of both factions turned to her as she levitated off the ground, energy crackling around her. "This war ends today," she commanded. "You can't halt this. It's our fate," Lilith spat back. "No, it's our decision," Jessica countered. "Vampires and werewolves. We share more similarities than differences. We're all children of darkness." Murmurs of agreement echoed in response. "We've been weakened by division and hatred for far too long," Jessica continued. "United, we could be invincible." Hope sparked in many eyes while Lilith snarled, "Traitor, I created you." She lunged at Jessica but was caught midair. "You didn't create me, you unleashed me," Jessica roared. With a surge of power and a quick twist of her wrist, Lilith disintegrated into ashes. An eerie silence descended. Landing softly, Jessica turned to Thorn. "Will you join me?" "For peace," Thorn agreed as they clasped hands, vampire and werewolf united under one cause. A new dawn broke over the horizon. The centuries-old hatred between vampires and werewolves did not disappear overnight, but slowly, things began to change. A council was formed, led by both Jessica and Thorn, representing both sides to work toward a peaceful coexistence. In secret, the supernatural world flourished as vampires and werewolves joined to protect humanity from darker forces. Years later, standing on a rooftop overlooking the city, Thorne joined Jessica. "Worried?" he asked. "Just reminiscing," she replied with a smile. "About?" he probed. "How one swipe right altered everything," she said with a chuckle. Thorne pulled her close, their lips meeting under the moonlight. Vampire and werewolf bound by love, united in purpose. The prophecy was realized and a new chapter unfolded. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Thank you for watching.